This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Don Ma filling in for Tiffany Meyer. As Nikki Haley drops out without endorsing former President Trump, both Trump and Biden are now courting Haley's voters. Trump has also challenged Biden to a debate anytime and anywhere. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
Both Trump and Biden are now directly asking Nikki Haley supporters to join their camps, though their messaging is quite different. And Trump, while saying that Biden is the enemy and that he's inviting all Nikki Haley supporters to join the MAGA movement, also criticized Nikki Haley, saying she trounced on Super Tuesday and that a lot of her supporters and donors were actually Democrats. And President Biden, meanwhile, praised Nikki Haley in a Wednesday statement, saying she was willing to speak the truth about Donald Trump, adding that Nikki Haley supporters have a place in his campaign. Meanwhile, both Trump and Biden's appeal came after Nikki Haley on Wednesday morning dropped out of the race and congratulated Trump, but stopped short of actually endorsing him. Here's what Nikki Haley was saying. Watch.
I congratulate him. It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
Meanwhile, as the field starts to clear out, Trump is getting some surprise endorsements from some Republicans in Congress who were actually quite reluctant to openly support him. Among them, there were Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who had been criticizing Trump over January 6th, and also Congressman Ralph Norman, who was Nikki Haley's only supporter in the House GOP. Watch.
I would support the nominee for president, even if it were the former president.
She did a good job. But the people chose Donald Trump. That's a good thing.
And on the Democratic side, Congressman Dean Phillips ended his long shot challenge to President Biden also on Wednesday. And as we're looking increasingly at a two-man race in this November, and Trump on Wednesday directly challenged President Biden to debate him one-on-one, quote, anytime, anywhere. The White House on Wednesday would not say if President Biden would take that offer, while referring that question to the Biden campaign. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Last night, NTD covered the Super Tuesday elections right here on The Nation Decides. And joining us with some post-election coverage is our own Dave Martin. Dave, what stands out to you now, a day later?
Thanks, Don. We've got some exit poll data that kind of tells a story of how and why some of these states turned out the way they did. Let's start first with Virginia. Now remember, Virginia, if I can get this thing, Virginia has an open election, meaning anyone can come in and cast a vote, whether it's undeclared, independents, even Democrats, and based on these numbers, it looks like some of them did. Virginia voters, these are for Haley. The ones that actually voted for Haley that wanted her to get in office, 36%. The ones that just came in and voting against Trump, 60% of them. That's quite a high amount there. So nearly 2/3 of Haley's voters were really just voting against Trump. Trump still won by nearly a 2-to-1 margin. Meanwhile, for Trump voters here, let's see what his did. A much different story here. Trump voters in Virginia were actually voting for Trump, 85%. Only 12 of them said they just didn't want Nikki Haley in. Quite a contrast. You could say this is called voter enthusiasm. Trump's supporters really want him back in office. Now let's go to North Carolina. 74 delegates were up for grabs there. That was the third most up for grabs last night, behind only California and Texas. Let's take a look at this. What did they find were the most important issues? In North Carolina, number one, immigration. Number two, economy at 31%. Abortion was third at 11% and foreign policy at 9%. Now, it's no surprise with those two as the top issues Trump cleaned up in this state. He took nearly 3/4 of the vote. But his North Carolina win is even more surprising kind of when you look at the demographics. Let's look at this now, if I can get this moving. Who supported each of them? Now, moderates supporting Haley, 62%, Trump's 30%. No surprise there. Nikki Haley has done much better with the moderates. Independents, this is actually kind of the national story. It's been neck and neck. In some areas, it's a little bit more for Haley. Some areas, it's a little more for Trump. It's very close here. This part, though, is actually very surprising. The college educated has technically been not Trump's strongest point, really not the Republicans' strongest point. But as you can see here, Trump 50% to 45%. That's very surprising because, you know, Haley really compares much more favorably to Marco Rubio in 2016. Rubio did much better with this group. Well, let's see, now that, you know, Trump and Biden really have virtually no competition left in their parties, let's take a look at a national poll of how they are doing. Who would you vote for today? Now, this is actually late February. Joe Biden, 43%, Donald Trump, 48%. Not a huge surprise as Biden's approval rating continues to drop, so of course he's going to lose ground to Trump here. But who's actually voting for Trump is actually somewhat surprising to me. Take a look at this demographic here. Support among Hispanic voters, Joe Biden, 40%, Donald Trump, 46%. Again, this is a late February poll. This is very surprising. Hispanics have historically voted more for Democrats, so to see this, you know, flip, even if they were tied, it would be a surprise. This is a very surprising announcement here. Now, as far as young people goes, Biden, of course, is definitely trying to appeal to the young voters. He's canceled student debt, even has a TikTok account to try to reach to them. Who they think would do better? Well, of course, handling the economy. Donald Trump, 51% to 23% for Biden, not surprising there. Immigration border, another big win by Trump here, 50% to 19%. Now, this is registered voters ages 18 to 29, by the way, taken about a month ago. The Israel-Hamas war, Donald Trump, 36% to 13%, nearly 3 times that. Now, abortion policy, I'm not surprised, of course, at this one, but I'm surprised in the margin, 46% for Joe Biden to just 29% for Donald Trump. The 17% is actually smaller than any of these 3 issues. This seems to be a smaller problem maybe than the Democrats thought because they're trying to harp on this. So this is another surprising poll here to me. But you know, after last night, Trump, by most measures, was up to 1,060 delegates. Now, there's still some unaccounted for votes from last night, or delegates, I should say, more than 60 to 70 more. Haley obviously has dropped out today, so you would think by next Tuesday, there's 4 more elections next Tuesday night, 160 delegates are up for grabs. He should get past the 1,215 mark to get the GOP nomination that night. I mean, we already know it's over with Haley dropping out. It should be mathematically over next Tuesday night. Anyway, that's all I have for me right now. Dawn, back to you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dave. And Georgia attorney Ashley Merchant testified before a state panel investigating District Attorney Fani Willis. She told the panel the embattled prosecutor has committed a felony. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more on the hearing.
My allegation and my motion is that, you know, the bigger the case is, the more money.
Georgia attorney Ashley Merchant tells a special state Senate panel Wednesday why she thinks District Attorney Fani Willis should be disqualified. The committee is investigating allegations of misconduct by Willis involving potential conflicts of interest and misuse of public funds. Merchant is a defense attorney representing Michael Roman in the sprawling racketeering case filed by Willis against former President Trump and several others. Merchant claims that Willis's romantic relationship with her top prosecutor, Nathan Wade, is a conflict of interest, and that she expanded the size of the case so that Wade could make more money.
So expanding the litigation, because of how large it is, the judge has said we're probably going to have 3 trials, and each of them is going to take several months. Where if you just imagine, follow me down the path, if you only indicted one person and it was narrow, you know, you could try it in a month. That's a lot more money. And so that, to me, was a financial motive.
A Democrat member of the panel challenged Merchant on her claim of a financial motive.
But earlier you said that you believe, which was total speculation, that they created this case against your client to do more billing. And what you're just telling me now is that he was willing to stop his billing because he offered your client a misdemeanor and you rejected it. You're the one who's continuing the billing.
Merchant said Willis combined 3 different types of cases into one, and that's how it was expanded.
There's the folks that are involved at the federal level. You see those people having, they were in D.C. Then you see the electors. Then you see Kaufman County.
Merchant also claims that Willis and Wade lied about when their relationship began.
So what are the consequences for an attorney to give sworn testimony that she did if you're Bradley, what is it, Yerke? Yerty, your Trackhawk data, your other independent verifications are found to be truthful.
It's a crime. It's a felony. You'd lose your license.
Okay.
It's perjury.
Same for Wade.
Yes.
The committee doesn't have the power to sanction Willis, but it can subpoena witnesses and seek testimony under oath. At the end of their investigation, the committee could produce a report that proposes changes to state law or budgeting to the DA's office. The chairman said there were a number of people who want to testify. He told Ms. Merchant she may be called to come back and testify again. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And in the federal election interference case, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on April 25th on whether former President Trump is immune from criminal charges. The Republican-led House of Representatives just passed the 6 first appropriation bills for fiscal year 2024. Speaker Mike Johnson relied on Democrats to pass the controversial funding package. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez joins us from the Capitol. Luis, what can you tell us about this legislation and why its passage in the House taken so long?
Good evening, Don, and to the audience. Yes, a very controversial funding package. So the House of Representatives has been working on an agreement to fund government through fiscal year 2024 for over 5 months past their deadline. That means that since October 1st of last year, government has been funded via continuing resolutions or stopgap bills. The latest of these CR, or latest stopgap bill, is set to expire this Friday, leaving without funding 6 government departments. Now, the controversial part of this funding package, Don, is how it was brought to the House floor. Freedom Caucus members wanted Speaker Johnson to have an appropriations process in which each of the 12 appropriation bills was debated and voted separately on the House floor. Instead, Speaker Mike Johnson chose a strategy of lumping together 2 groups of 6 appropriation bills, one with a deadline this Friday, and that was what the House voted on earlier today, and the second group of 6 appropriation bills are due before March 22nd. Let's hear what Speaker Mike Johnson had to say in defense of his strategy.
It takes a long time to turn an aircraft carrier, and we're doing that gradually. We're forcing reforms, trying to force Congress back into the mode, the statutory mode, the lawful mode, in the way in which it's supposed to work with regard to government funding. That means 12 separate appropriations bills, not all lumped into one.
So Speaker Mike Johnson defended his strategy, but also touted budget cuts to the EPA, the FBI, and the ATF. The Freedom Caucus were relentless in their criticism of Speaker Johnson's strategy, and on Tuesday released a statement asking fellow congressmen to vote against the funding package. Don, I want to read an excerpt from this statement from the Freedom Caucus published on Tuesday because I think it's very telling of their political calculations. In their statement, the Freedom Caucus say, and I quote, "The omnibus surrenders Republicans' leverage to force radical Democrats to the table to truly secure the southern border and end the purposeful, dangerous mass release of illegal aliens into the United States." So, Don, now this funding package that was approved in the House floor, even though 83 Republicans voted against it and 2 Democrats also voted against it, is now heading to the Senate, where Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has indicated he will bring it to the Senate floor as quickly as possible in order to avoid a Friday partial government shutdown. If approved by the Senate and then if signed by the President, this funding bill will dispense of over $460 billion to 6 government departments. Back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that update, Luis. President Biden's job approval is more consequential than ever in this year's election. Join NTD's Steve Lance for live coverage of President Biden's State of the Union address and the Republican response tomorrow night. We'll have lawmakers and our reporters live on the Hill. Also, political analysis from Washington. Tune in Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Turning our attention now to the Middle East, Houthi attacks in the Red Sea are leading to the deaths of sailors for the first time. The Biden administration confirmed today that a Houthi missile killed at least 2 crew members aboard a commercial ship off the coast of Yemen. The ship was a bulk carrier owned by Libya and carrying a Barbados flag. The ship has since been abandoned, and Allied warships are now in the area assessing the situation. At least 6 other crew members were reportedly injured. This marks the first time that the Houthis have killed anyone as part of their ongoing attacks on ships transiting the Red Sea. The Iran-backed terrorist group said they had warned the ship before they fired the missile. The Houthis have vowed not to stop their attacks in the Red Sea until Israel stops fighting in Gaza. Humanitarian aid has certainly been an issue in the Gaza Strip since the war began on October 7th. NTD reporter Jason Perry is here to break it down for us. Jason, what is the humanitarian situation right now on the ground in Gaza?
It appears that things are getting very desperate. I think how desperate the situation really is came into view last week when humanitarian aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip, and reportedly over 100 people were killed from the stampede of people trying to get food. Countries have also been airdropping humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, but it still appears to be a kind of push-shove, survival of the fittest mentality as to who gets the food. And at the same time, the U.S. is urging Israel to do more to get humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip.
Okay, so then what is Israel doing to help the situation?
Well, Israel has been inspecting the trucks of humanitarian aid before they get into the Gaza Strip. Last week, approximately 277 aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip each day. Now let's listen to what Israeli government spokesperson Elon said today.
The problem is distribution. The UN is struggling to distribute aid at the pace that Israel is letting it in. And the reason is that the UN relies on UNRWA, which is a Hamas front. That is why aid is piling up undistributed on the Gazan side of the crossing.
On the other hand, the United Nations says it's been impossible to distribute the aid because of the breakdown of law and order. The UN also said that Israel should provide security for them to deliver the aid.
Okay, so then did Israel's government spokesperson mention anything about Israel providing security for the aid trucks in the Gaza Strip?
All right, well, he didn't get into any specifics here, although he did say that Israel provided security for over a dozen aid trucks that went into the northern Gaza Strip. Israel's government spokesperson also said that Israel is now working in the private sector to try to get more aid into the hands of the humanitarian people while making sure that Hamas cannot steal it.
All right, Jason, thank you very much for that update.
Thank you, Don.
Chinese-owned TikTok once again in the hot seat. This comes as the White House says it's backing a bipartisan bill aimed at targeting TikTok's access to the U.S. market. NTD Sam Wong has details on the new legislation.
It's another round of action targeting TikTok.
And allowing a CCP-controlled entity like TikTok to become the dominant media player in America would be like if in 1962, at the height of the Cold War, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis, we'd allowed Pravda and the KGB to purchase the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC, and NBC.
On Capitol Hill Wednesday, a bipartisan group of lawmakers announced new legislation titled Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Control Application Act. The bill specifically describes TikTok and its China-owned parent company ByteDance as threats to U.S. national security. If the bill passes, TikTok will face 2 options, either to divest from ByteDance within about 5 months or to face a total ban from all web hosting services in the U.S. A TikTok spokesperson responded to the legislation, saying it will trample on First Amendment rights of 170 million Americans. But lawmakers said the bill isn't about going after the app itself, but rather to address concerns surrounding its ownership structure.
Our goal is to decouple TikTok and other platforms from the malign influence and control of the Chinese Communist Party.
Americans' data is always at risk of seizure by the CCP.
This is a CCP-controlled company claiming to stand up for constitutional rights while simultaneously engaging in slavery and horrific human rights abuses.
What's more, the legislation also allows the White House to designate certain applications controlled by foreign adversaries, namely China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Experts and top U.S. officials have long voiced concern over ByteDance's ties to the Chinese Communist Party. More specifically, that it could force TikTok to submit American users' data.
The legislation that we've got out today is a product of particularly the last year's worth of work. People are starting to recognize that this isn't just about my data might be not being used properly. No, that data is being used to attack you and attack our country.
The House Energy and Commerce Committee will mark up the bill Thursday. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
And a bill targeting Chinese biotech companies is moving forward in the Senate. The Senate Homeland Security Committee voted earlier today to approve a bill that could restrict business with companies like BGI and Wuxi AppTech. The bill is designed to keep Americans' personal health and genetic information from getting into the hands of foreign adversaries. Former NFL star Tim Tebow is seeking more congressional support in the fight against child sexual exploitation. He spoke before the House Judiciary Committee today to ask for resources. NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
A young girl who went through extreme abuse for 7 years, and almost every night she got raped for 7 years. And in the middle of her abuse, this is what she writes. Rescue me. Help me. Monsters are chasing. Can't you see?
Former NFL star Tim Tebow went to Congress Wednesday to ask for resources in the fight against child pornography. The scale of this crime has been exploding over the years. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 1 million reports of suspected child pornography in 2014. That number jumped to over 32 million in 2022.
One goal, to build a rescue team. Because there's so many frontline warriors and heroes, but there's just not enough. And we need to support them, and we need more of them.
Tebow says the number of victims far exceeds the existing resources needed to rescue them. Not enough trained experts are analyzing the images and videos, identifying the victims, and then trying to rescue them while catching the perpetrators.
Most of the images are being produced by fathers, family members, and child offenders within the child's circle of trust. These are your neighbors. These are people you work with. Maybe you play golf with them. This is your daughter's best friend's father that you send your daughter over to their house for a sleepover.
Child protection expert Camille Cooper said big tech accountability is a big factor. She said they could be doing more to fight the problem.
One company that is doing this well, it's Google. They have a dedicated victim identification team within their company, and they are literally rescuing thousands of children, and they need to be a model.
A former law enforcement commander said that out of the millions of child pornography reports a year, the Department of Homeland Security rescues only around 1,000 children. It rescues victims globally, but the vast majority of those rescued are in the United States. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Now, let's take a closer look at some of the ballot measures that voters approved in the elections yesterday. San Francisco will be bolstering the police. Voters in that city approved 2 ballot measures backed by Mayor London Breed that deal with drug abuse and crime. One of them mandates drug screening or treatment for county welfare recipients. The other gives the San Francisco police expanded powers to use technologies like drones and surveillance cameras. They can also use vehicles to pursue suspects in non-violent crimes. The mayor celebrated the results. She said, "We are a city that offers help, but not a city where you can just come and do whatever you want on our streets." At the same time, the Washington, D.C. City Council approved similar measures in a public safety bill. It increases penalties for certain crimes, allows authorities to collect DNA samples from suspects, and give judges more power to jail suspects charged with violent crimes. The latest in New York City's crime saga. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has a plan to deal with increased subway crime in the city. NTD's Chris Beers was on the streets of the Big Apple today for our update.
New York City subways could look a lot different in the very near future. Just this morning, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul announced a plan to deploy 750 National Guard troops and 250 New York State troopers to New York City subways. That's as crime is up in the subways. NYPD has said that in 2023 alone, there were 570 reported incidents of felony assaults in the subways. That's the highest number in 20 years. Let's hear what New Yorkers have to say about this problem. Do you feel safe on New York City subways?
No, I don't. Not at all. Like, I recently started spending so much more money on Ubers because I'm so scared of taking the train.
Yes, because I don't know, there's crazy people everywhere, sort of, and if you just mind your business and put a little bit of a mean look on your face, they normally don't really interact with you. So I think you just have to be smart.
For the most part, I mean, it's all about surrounding yourself with people that you feel comfortable with.
There are 472 subway stops in New York City, so Hochul's plan will allow for roughly 2 officers per stop. Of course, they'll be focused more heavily on busier stops. They'll be patrolling both train cars and the station platforms and checking people's bags for weapons. All of this is on top of the 1,000 NYPD officers New York City Mayor Eric Adams ordered into the subway last month. And New York Governor Kathy Hochul is planning to deploy about 750 National Guard troops, 250 New York State police officers to patrol the subways, check people's bags for weapons. How do you feel about that?
I feel like that would be great, but I feel like with New York City's commotion, I feel like it wouldn't be feasible.
Probably a bit over militaristic, I think.
I think that that's a great idea. It would definitely make people like me feel safer. I'm always by myself. I'm a woman, you know.
When asked about why there's been such an increase in crime in New York City, Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark said, "It's people thinking that they can get away with it, whatever they want." He calls it total disrespect for humanity. We'll have more on New York Governor Kathy Hochul's bill to introduce National Guard troops here in New York as the troops get deployed. This is Chris Beers reporting for NTD News in New York City.
And now we have some breaking news. The House Judiciary Committee and the Subcommittee on Government Weaponization have just released a new report. Lawmakers say the report exposes massive government surveillance of Americans' financial data. According to the report, federal law enforcement surveyed the private transactions of Americans following the January 6th Capitol breach. Officials from the Treasury Department and the FBI allegedly met with top banks and discussed options for them to share customer information voluntarily outside of normal legal processes. The report also says officials asked banks to search transactions using certain keywords such as MAGA, Trump, Biden, Kamala, Pelosi, Antifa, and white power. The Government Weaponization Subcommittee will hold a hearing tomorrow morning to discuss the report. Coming up, Nikki Haley is out of the race now, but how will her supporters vote in November? An Epoch Times reporter who's been following Haley's campaign joins us to discuss. Stay tuned for more after the break here on NTD News. Joining me now to react to Nikki Haley's decision to drop out of the race is Lawrence Wilson. He's an Epoch Times reporter who's been following Haley's campaign. So Lawrence, the first thing I want your comments on is, following Haley's announcement, President Biden made an appeal to her supporters saying that President Trump doesn't want them, but there's a place for them in his campaign. Lawrence, who are Haley's voters more likely to support in the general, Biden or Trump or someone else entirely?
Well, that's very difficult to say, but based on the interviews that we've done with Haley supporters, which we've been asking that question for several weeks now, and one of their key motivations almost across the board has been not just to support Nikki Haley, but these are people who are what I would call never Trumpers. They're highly motivated to see President Trump not be elected for a second term. Now, the question is, will they vote Democrat instead of voting for a Republican that they don't care for much? That's an open question. Some say they will. Some say they'll write in another name. Very few have said they would vote for a third-party candidate. They think that's just hurting one party or one candidate, but not really helping the independent. So it's difficult to say. The one thing I can tell you is that Haley voters definitely do not want to see Trump return to the White House.
And a follow-up as well, what will happen to Haley's delegates now that she's dropped out of the race?
Well, those delegates are committed to her for the first 1 or 2 rounds of voting in the convention. The rules differ according to the state party, but the delegates that she has collected are bound to vote for her on at least the first nominating ballot at the Republican National Convention in July. Now, of course, she's got so few at this point that it's not going to hinder the nominating process. It won't be any threat to Trump. But if he, for some reason, were not elected on the first or second ballot, they could vote for him or anyone else. But they'll remain with Haley through the process.
And a lot of people have noticed as well that in announcing her campaign suspension, Haley didn't endorse Trump. So what is your reading of this move, and are we likely to see a future endorsement from her?
Well, I'd say at this point it's probably unlikely. This campaign between the two of them got a little bit divisive, a little bit bitter toward the end, and she has made no bones about the fact that she doesn't want to see Donald Trump return to the White House. On the other hand, she has consistently said that she has no personal problems with the former president. She said, you know, I like him fine. I just don't want him to be the next president. So we'll have to see. It is remarkable, and she's the only one so far who's dropped out and not endorsed Trump. And she has hedged in recent comments about whether she ever would endorse Trump. She's kind of been non-committal about that. We'll have to see. I think it's quite possible she never will endorse Trump.
And since we're on the topic of endorsements, I want your thoughts on this as well. Senator Mitch McConnell today endorsed Trump, despite long-running enmity between the two. Who do you think this move serves to benefit more? Trump, McConnell, as he leaves his post in Senate leadership, or perhaps the Republican Party as a whole?
My take, for what it's worth, is that it probably benefits the party more than any individual. McConnell and Trump have not gotten along so well ever since, especially since January 6th. So his endorsement is probably not going to bring an awful lot of people into the Trump fold. And I don't think Mitch McConnell needs anything to cement his legacy. He's got a long and established career. He doesn't need one more person to affirm him in order to cement that legacy. I think he's looking to unify the Republican Party. He is, after all, an old school politician and highly values party loyalty.
And Lauren, since you're in California covering the races, tell us about the race to fill the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's seat is shaping up.
Well, it's good for Republicans in some ways, and it's very good for Democrats in others. The top 2 finishers now in California system, regardless of what party, the top 2 finishers advance to the general election. So Adam Schiff, congressman who ran to fill that seat, a Democrat, he won with about 34% of the vote. Steve Garvey, a Republican who is known to many longtime baseball fans as a longtime All-Star with the LA Dodgers, he came in second with about 24%. So he's well behind, but not out of the question. So it's going to be a Republican and a Democrat running for Senate this fall. That hasn't happened in 2 or 3 cycles here in California. On the other hand, Democratic voters outnumber Republicans by 2 to 1 here in California, so it's very unlikely that Garvey can pull off an upset there, but it does represent the Republican Party in the Senate race.
Well, all right, Lawrence Wilson, political reporter for the Epoch Times, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
As President Biden and former President Trump dominated their Super Tuesday races across the country, voters in California described yesterday's primaries as tense and interesting to watch. NTD's Eileen Ng leads us off tonight on some important down-ballot races in the nation's most populous state.
While much of the focus is on the presidential race, there were also important down-ballot contests. California voters narrowed down on 2 candidates to fill the Senate seat long held by Dianne Feinstein. Democratic Representative Adam Schiff and Republican Steve Garvey, a former professional baseball player, will face off in the general election. California has 2 open seats for the U.S. Senate this year, one for a 6-year full term and another for a 6-month term, and Garvey has been a candidate for both. Some voters in San Mateo County reported that they had trouble finding Garvey's name on their electronic ballots.
I scrolled up and down. I could not find his name on the ballot. So knowing that there were 2 Senate races, I flipped to the next page to see the second Senate race, and again, I did not see his name on the ballot. So I went and I asked one of the people there for assistance, and she came over and we looked up and down, and I couldn't find it. Then after going back and forth a few times, his name suddenly appeared. It's like, oh, there it is. Well, I know it wasn't there before, so it just kind of popped up out of nowhere.
A representative from the San Mateo County voting office informed the Epoch Times that the difficulty was caused by the long list of candidates running for the U.S. Senate seats this year in California's primary election. Voters had to spend extra time searching for the names of the preferred candidates. The Epoch Times was able to verify that there were 2 other Garvey supporters who went to a voting station in Redwood City in San Mateo County and had no problems voting for Garvey. In San Francisco, voters weighed in on public safety measures on Tuesday's ballot that reflect frustration over crime and drug use in the politically liberal city.
The ones that would be really important to me are infrastructure in terms of transportation, especially municipal transportation. I care about that a lot. And then public education. So taxpayer-funded education, especially at like the university and college level. So that would be something that I care about. And continued investment into like the Affordable Care Act and public health care for all.
In Los Angeles County, District Attorney George Gascon will face former U.S. Attorney Nathan Hochman in the general election. Additionally, Supervisor Janice Hahn will keep her seat from opponent former Sheriff Alex Villanueva. On a state level, voters were split on Governor Gavin Newsom's Proposition 1 on mental health care to tackle the homeless crisis, with 50.7% of voters approving it as of 1 a.m. on Wednesday. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump won their party's nominations, despite many voters preferring something other than a November rematch from 4 years ago.
I don't think it's a slam dunk for any party, but that's why it makes it kind of tense and makes it kind of nervous. So I'm tense. I'm tense, if I'm being honest.
Democratic leaders in liberal cities across the U.S. have had mixed results as they struggle to balance progressive criminal justice reforms with fed-up voters.
Is the Chinese Communist Party attempting to influence America's film industry? You might remember how Top Gun Maverick attempted to strip the Japanese and Taiwanese flags off of Tom Cruise's jacket, or how Iron Man 3 inserted a Chinese doctor into the movie who saves the life of Tony Stark. Now, was it artistic license or something more sinister? These issues are explored in the groundbreaking new documentary, Hollywood Takeover, China's Control in the Film Industry. This NTD original film pulls back the curtain on how Hollywood is helping to further a global adversary's agenda and the consequences that will have on America's future, as well as what brave individuals are doing to change the tide. The film premieres on the red carpet in Los Angeles today at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time. It will be released globally on March 8th on Epoch TV. For more information about the documentary, please visit HollywoodTakeover.com. What's considered left-wing and what's considered right-wing in today's political climate? A meme showing how the political winds have shifted over the years is resonating with a lot of people online, including Elon Musk. Joining me now is the original author of the meme, Colin Wright. He's an evolutionary biologist, NTD News contributor, and founding editor of Reality's Last Stand. All right, Colin, first off, tell us about your now famous comic that Elon Musk recently shared on X and why it's resonating with so many people.
That's a good question. I made the comic back in 2022, and Elon shared it back then the first time without attributing it to me, but that's okay. It went really viral because I think it just resonates with a lot of people who consider themselves on the left hand of the political spectrum, who've since sort of become alienated or disaffected from a lot of the values that they used to view as being sort of on the left hand of the political spectrum. Ones like valuing free speech over censorship. You often now see people on the left talk about free speech using scare quotes, quote unquote free speech. Then idea of judging people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. This has been overturned by critical race theory and certain equity initiatives that explicitly promote racial identity over individual characters. And then women's rights issues where, I wrote an article for Newsweek a couple years ago saying you can't claim to be the party of women's rights if you don't know what a woman is. And so this sort of denial of fundamental biology is not only harming women's rights, but it's being used to justify these surgical interventions on sex non-conforming kids. So I think a lot of people view these things and are pretty baffled that the left could be embracing these and now see these best reflected sort of on the center left hand of the political spectrum. And that's what my cartoon is meant to indicate, that the political winds have sort of shifted or the grounds have shifted beneath my feet, whereas I've basically stayed in the same place.
Now, Super Tuesday is still very much on many people's minds, so I want to ask you this. Elon Musk and podcast host Joe Rogan have indicated they're open to voting for Trump this election. How many disaffected classical liberals do you see voting Trump this election, even if it's reluctantly?
I see a lot more than the first time around in 2020, mainly because on all these issues that I just highlighted earlier, the left has gotten just worse on them. They've doubled down on all of those issues, and more people are now aware of them and are increasingly disaffected. So I do see a lot more people who are in my camp, who are traditionally from the left, being more disaffected, and a lot of them are probably more likely to vote for Trump, hold their nose while they do it, just because they don't see any sort of end in sight for the woke insanity we're seeing on the left hand of the political spectrum.
I see. Maybe you can elaborate even more with some more examples as to why this is.
As to why people on the left are disaffected?
Yeah, and then they're maybe perhaps left with no choice but to vote for Trump.
Well, I mean, I think Biden was billed as sort of being this moderate figure, and since he's come in office on day one, he rescinded Trump's executive order on critical race theory. So now it lets people basically discriminate based on race. And they've since doubled down on gender-affirming care at the highest level of office. You see Rachel Levine, who's identifies as trans themselves, is now advocating for these sort of child mutilation procedures. And the only person really who's advocated against these positions on the right in any meaningful way, well, one is DeSantis, but he's fallen to the wayside. But Trump is really the only person who's going to oppose all of this stuff. And so a lot of people who really don't like these ideas have no other choice but to vote in that direction.
I see. I also want to ask you about this. You're the founding editor of Reality's Last Stand, and we hear a lot about democracy being on the ballot this year. But I'm wondering, do you and others in your camp see it as realities on the ballot this year? And if so, what does that mean to you?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great way to put it. I called my website Reality's Last Stand because of this pervasive ideology in the culture that denies the existence of male and female. If you can deny this fundamental aspect of our human biology, there's nothing you can't possibly deny. So I view this as reality's last stand. And exactly, I think one side of the political spectrum is advocating for viewing men and women and girls and boys as these socially constructed categories with no root in nature. And the other side says, no, this is clearly false. And it's also an important way to structure society in many ways. So I do think that reality is on the ballot as far as that goes.
Thank you very much for your time today, Colin. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Don Ma. Good night.